Part 84. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 843. At this moment, the suspension of broadcasting is no less important to the entire listening circle than when the world suddenly learned the news of the disintegration of the Soviet Union. What followed was a collective panic from the lower to the middle and upper levels. However, no one directly felt that they were free, and no one in the audience was frantically wanting to cause some damage to vent their anger. Probably because the shadow left by the radio on everyone's mind is so profound. Except for some big-name listeners who know some of the real situation, the rest of the listeners still wonder if the radio is playing a joke on everyone. When you go wild, it will suddenly come back and catch you. This seems to suit the bad taste of radio. Boss-level listeners from all over the world no longer continue to retreat, but focus on the circle with themselves as the center. Regardless of the final showdown, whether it is the broadcast that laughs last or the Oriental couple who laughs best, maintain this moment. The stability of the situation is indeed a must. Everyone are all waiting. The final ending. Haha, Subai suddenly felt ridiculous. Based on what Hills had seen and his own feelings now, it seemed that the death of the ghost NPC in this story world really had a lot to do with him. Relation. Subai didn't understand why or how it was done. In fact, he had thought about this problem many times before. Suyuhang and the two people regarded themselves as guinea pigs. What kind of guinea pigs were they? At least Subai himself didn't see any specific experimental results on himself, but if this is the experimental result. Subai looked at the motionless ghost in front of him. If this is the result of the experiment, then I am like a dog tied to a remote-controlled bomb, and the couple can press the button to detonate themselves at any time. The reason why they never detonated it was just that they were waiting for the right time. So, does that mean now the couple who have been hiding for 20 years have come out of the shadows? Subai clenched his fists, but didn't know what to do. This was a duel that was beyond his control, but he was so obviously used as a pawn by one side in this duel. I feel aggrieved and helpless, but there is really nothing I can do. At this moment, starting from the story world of Subai, more than half of the current story worlds have problems. Broadcasting's control over the story world is constantly declining, but this decline is full of a strangeness. It was like being Ed, and the broadcast didn't even bother to subconsciously block it. Idle is idle, we can find out how this story scene should have worked. There should be a problem with the broadcast, but the story world is not destroyed, and we are not transported out of the story world. In other words, if we can find the established rules of the game and complete the tasks here, we can return to the real world. And, now that the ghost is dead, I feel like we're actually getting more relaxed. It's like a level clearing game. Originally, you needed to deal with the big and small bosses in front of you one by one, but now these bosses no longer block you. The difficulty is just to find the door that leads to the final level. After saying that, Hill stood up and shouted to the others without waiting for Subai's reaction. Let's look for it together and find the original storyline in this scene. If you have any ideas, you can tell me directly. There is obviously something wrong with the broadcast now. We must seize the time to find an opportunity to leave the story world. The real world is a relatively safe place, so I hope everyone will put aside their prejudices and fights first. There is no interest that is more important than returning to the real world safely at this time. Among the 9 people present, only Subai and Hills were high-level listeners. As Subai was obviously mentally abnormal, Hill's words were obviously more appealing. Indeed, there is something wrong with the broadcast now, and everyone in the story world is like a player on a roller coaster. When there is something wrong with the roller coaster, of course, they must first think about how to get off safely, otherwise everyone may fall to death together. Subai still sat in his original position, taking deep breaths, while the others began to work and search in the laboratory. About half an hour later, Montari found a way to open the only door, and then the door opened. This meant that the route for everyone to enter the first mission scene from the second mission scene was opened, and there was no substance benefits, but it can also be regarded as progress and inspiring enough. It seems that the audience has not experienced being in a story world, without having to worry about the bad taste of the radio, or the control and influence of the radio. They can just explore the story world as they like. This feeling, to be honest, is quite pleasant. An hour later, Chen-Ming and Diana seemed to have cracked open the internal security system of the laboratory's computer system. At this time, Subai felt that his head seemed to be less painful than before, and the hallucination and oppression were much less severe than before. Hills came over at this time. He was also under investigation before, but there are specialties in the field. Diana Montari and Chen-Ming are obviously more proficient in electronics and other things. In this laboratory, there is no formation, so there are not many places for Hills to perform. Is it better? Hills asked. Subai nodded. How do you know? Because I saw that the flames emanating from your body began to decrease, at least more than half of what it was at the beginning, and the gem that absorbed your flames has now become the main output. Hills pointed at the gem. It has now replaced you as the largest source of radiation. I know that you did not do this intentionally, but I believe that doing it unintentionally will have such an effect, so I'm very curious, what is going on with all this? Hills is a curious baby, or in other words, the guardians of the Western land of enlightenment are basically curious babies, otherwise they would not all be able to find the formations leading to the Eastern land of enlightenment. First of all, you must have a good parent, Subai replied. Huh, Hills obviously didn't understand what this meant. Stop talking nonsense, let's take a look at the situation over there. I also want to leave the story world as soon as possible. Subai stood up. His condition was much better than before, and he could indeed stand up and do things. However, when Subai looked at the gem seriously again, his heart couldn't help but twitch slightly. The man and the woman had calculated what story world they were entering now, so they chose to do so at this time. Hands on. Broadcast designed this story world and played it many times. The ghost woman even glanced at him when she introduced the laboratory. If nothing else, this laboratory should have a direct relationship with Su Yuhang. At that time, Su Yuhang was doing this experiment with another ordinary person, and they had achieved results, but they were broadcasted. Destroyed. After that, broadcasting took out the Zhao family villa and the laboratory to create a story world. According to broadcasting's temperament, this should be regarded as a kind of ridicule. It was a mockery of Su Yuhang's overestimation and whims. At the same time, this thing did pose some threat to him, so the broadcast deliberately cloned the scene and played it slowly. This feeling is like extreme sports popular in the West. Even though they know that if they are not careful, they will die, there are still a group of people obsessed with parkour among high-rise buildings. Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiao created themselves. Radio accepted itself. Su Yuhang built this laboratory. Broadcast accepted lab. And the radio actually sent itself into the story world of this laboratory environment. This means that the radio broadcaster knows that he is seeking death but is still deliberately seeking death. He is simply running wildly on the road of seeking death and cannot control himself. You can explain that the broadcast is due to self-confidence, too strong self-confidence, deliberately catering to Su Yuhang's thoughts and putting oneself into an absolute crisis in Su Yuhang's view, just like seeing a fire pit in front but deliberately jumping into it and showing off one's own strength. It's like showing off his immortal golden body. But, in fact, there is another possibility. That is, the broadcast is intentional, but the purpose is not to seek death. Found it, the experiment plan. Everyone finally cracked the system and retrieved the experiment plan. The ghost said before crashing, let them experience this experiment. If nothing else, the second person in this story world. The task of this scenario is to simulate this experiment again. As long as the simulation is successful, the task is completed, and everyone can be transported out of the story world. You should study it first, translate it into English, and then compare the Chinese and English aspects so that everyone can understand every step of this experiment. I don't want any mistakes or problems to occur when repeating the experiment. Hills gave instructions to everyone. Then he looked towards Sudbai and asked, "Guess what this experiment is for?" Sudbai hesitated for a while, thought for a while, and then slowly said one word. Yes, I'm asking you. Could it be that I'm asking someone else? Hills looked at Sudbai with some worry. Oh my God, what's wrong with you? I don't want my colleagues to do it because of this incident. Things are mentally abnormal, otherwise I would not dare to visit again after I leave this story world. Sudbai smiled and said. In fact, the answer has already been given. It's Long's birthday today. I'm going to have dinner with friends and then watch a movie with Long's sister-in-law in the evening. I'll just update it today. I hope you all understand. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiao Long. Chapter 844. It started to rain in the sky in Chengdu, and it was a thunderstorm. The rain poured down, and there was lightning and thunder in the sky. In a Chuan shop on the side of the road, a middle school student and an old man were sitting together and enjoying a meal. The middle school students are still wearing school uniforms, they look polite, and they even have a shyness in their movements. The old man sitting opposite him was wearing a shirt that was originally white but was now black and yellow, and a pair of large pants with several holes in them. The big yellow teeth in his mouth kept chewing food, saying "Smash it, smash it." The sound was louder than the several tables next door combined, attracting frequent glances from other diners. Hoo-hoo. A mouthful of refreshing madu, followed by a mouthful of cold beer, made the old man shiver with pleasure. The delicious food here cannot be appreciated by those who don't love it deeply. The middle school student served him food and wine, not as if he were treating his elders, but as if he was treating a friend of his, well, a friend who is not very good at eating and appearance. Haha, the old man smiled, my Guangwei has never been so diligent. Something's wrong. Chen Guang seemed very sincere. He called himself Guang Waer to the old man because he did have the capital. Want to know what's happening now? The old man continued to ask. In fact, there is nothing else that can compare to this. The old man felt like Ming Jing when the other party invited him. Ye Chen Guang nodded, only people at your level can know something, and senior listeners are basically blind on this matter. After working hard to climb up step by step, I found that he was just an outsider, not even a bystander. To be honest, it's quite uncomfortable. There's really no need to take this seriously. The old man waved his hand, not really being self-effacing and simply comforting Chen Guang, but taking a sip of beer with a slightly sarcastic look, and continued, actually, even if most of the people at this level are still blind, and there really aren't many things they can see. Most of the big guys are now waiting and watching, and the results of waiting and watching are nothing more than two endings. A sort of. The man and the woman were lucky enough to win. From then on, there will definitely be new rules and a new order. Let's not talk about this for now. Another possibility is that broadcasting deserves to win, so maybe everything will continue as usual, and maybe the rules will become even stricter. Now, although all the big-name listeners in the world are observing the development of the matter, not many people know what the confrontation is like, and the few who know the specific inside story also don't know. There will be no live announcement at this time. You should understand what this means. We are just bystanders, and we are not qualified to participate in this game. Uncle Dean and Auntie Dean, have they reached that level? Chen Guang took a sip of soy milk. He doesn't drink, and he doesn't like drinking. Moreover, his names for those two people have not changed. Height, the old man pondered for a moment and said, "It's hard to say how high the height is. I'm no match for him. That's for sure. I can't defeat either of the two in a single fight. But they are actually not too tall. At least, I can see their height." That shouldn't be the case. Chen Guang poured another glass of wine for the old man. If this is the case, doesn't it mean that there are many people who can challenge the broadcast and force it to this point? Even if there are still few now, in time, when everyone grows up, won't there be more and more? No, 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 in terms of pure strength, that couple is considered to be at the top of the big shot audience. This is strength on paper, you know? Just strength on paper. But in comparison, it is like the difference between an adult holding a knife and a child holding a knife, and the root of this gap lies in the understanding of broadcasting rules. Even. Use. When the old man said the last two words, he took a deep breath and looked a little depressed. He immediately waved his hand, and the noise around him completely disappeared. The customers on the other tables, including the boss himself, also became motionless. Chen Guang could feel the irritability and resentment in the old man's heart, and there was even some jealousy in it. This feeling is like a hard-working good student facing a genius born with a super high IQ, and this genius can also participate in the test questions. How can this compare? They are the proud sons of heaven. The old man's hand tapped the table gently. Anyone who can become a big-name audience is very proud, and he stepped on others step by step among the hundreds of audience members from the beginning. The corpse stood out. It was really uncomfortable for him to admit that someone else was the proud son of heaven, but it also reflected his sincere admiration for that couple. Aren't they using these 20 years to cultivate quietly? Chen Guang asked proactively, without the experience of the story world, if they just rely on their own concentrated research. They can't use common sense to judge it. The old man interrupted Chen Guang. Furthermore, I feel that their true strength has not increased much. First of all, they have been hiding in the darkness for the past 20 years, afraid to expose themselves to the broadcast site, and they cannot take the train to that place, and they cannot enter the story world. Under many restrictions and constraints, even if I admit that they are better than me, it is absolutely impossible for them to greatly improve their own strength in the past 20 years. But they did not wait, nor were they satisfied with just living an ordinary life after hiding from the broadcaster's eyes. Moreover, they knew their goals in their hearts and found their direction. The audience is all a group of desperados. Regardless of their level of strength, as long as they embark on this path, there is no such thing as any bullshit idea of discharging their armor and returning home to live a peaceful life. Therefore, they should have been studying broadcasting in the past 20 years. They no longer need to do too much research on the temperament of broadcasters. You should understand this truth. Therefore, I think what they study should be the rules of broadcasting and the story world of broadcasting. The rules of broadcasting? The story world of broadcasting. Chen Guang was a little confused, because he felt that the old man's words were beyond his imagination, and even broke his understanding of broadcasting. What is radio? It is a supreme, a master, but radio has its own rules. In the real world and in the story world, the existence of radio is actually different. Therefore, there must be something running. Maintain the steady progress of this situation. I probably think that the reason why they dared to stand up at this time, step out of the shadows, and face the broadcast directly. Very likely. They have mastered some or even most of the rules. For example, you can enter and exit the story world of the broadcast at will. Even. For example, in the story world of broadcasting, you can use abilities similar to broadcasting to change the story world. It's hard to imagine, but from my perspective, if this couple couldn't reach this level, I think they would never take the initiative to come out at this time. Having said this, the old man directly picked up a bottle of beer and drank it all in one breath. Comparing people with each other is so irritating. We are dolls raised by the radio, toys on the radio, and chess pieces on the chessboard. In fact, everyone is unwilling to do so, but there is nothing we can do. If that couple didn't stand up and cause today's events and situation, we can comfort ourselves that it is the radio that is too powerful and terrifying, not that we are timid. But what happened from last night to today gave us all a slap in the face. Yes, we are actually cowards. We are just a group of ostriches who only know how to stick their butts and bury their heads in the sand. The old man said angrily that Chen Guang wanted to get some information from him, and he regarded Chen Guang as the person to whom he confided. The most uncomfortable thing about this whole day is actually not the ordinary listeners who are kept in the dark and cannot see the real situation. The most uncomfortable thing is actually these big guys who think they are at the top. Chen Guang opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but found that he had no way of explaining it, and the other party didn't need his explanation. However, at this moment, Chen Guang saw a slender hand reaching out and taking out a stick from the pot in front of him. After dipping the lotus root slices on the stick on the dry plate in front of him, he put it into a charming picture in the mouth. Since I know that I am an ostrich and a coward, there is no need to pretend to be very angry and say these words, as if to show how unwilling I am. Interesting. The woman said unceremoniously to the old man in front of her while chewing the food. But the old man looked at the woman who suddenly appeared with a horrified look, and his body even began to tremble slightly. In Chengdu, or in other words, in the entire Shu region, according to the habit of judging by the jurisdiction of most of the boss-level audiences based on provincial and municipal administrative districts, this woman's prestige once enveloped the entire Shu region, and even had great influence throughout the country and even in the West. Evil reputation. The old man who was still aggrieved just now did not have the courage to get angry or refute the woman's ridicule. He even felt a little restless, even though he was now a big-name audience, but when he faced this woman again, but it was as if he, a senior audience member before, was trembling in front of her. Chen Guang calmed down his emotions, but his voice still trembled a little when he spoke, because this woman occupies a large space in his life. He once respected and loved her extremely, and later also expressed his love for her. She was deeply suspicious and resentful. Even now, when this woman suddenly appeared in front of him, for a moment, he really didn't know what attitude to use to face her. "Sister, are you back? The update is late today because I had some things to deal with during the day, so it was relatively late when I got home. There will be a chapter later, probably before 2 o'clock in the morning. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 845. One person carries the entire palace forward. One person leads an army to follow. This is a war similar to a silent film, but its charm and excitement are for those who can see some clues. Much more exciting than Chaplin's comedy. Neither Lu Menjiao nor Su Yuhang entered a certain story world again. On the one hand, it was because the weird attitude of the broadcast seemed to condone their misbehavior in the story world, and on the other hand, they themselves knew that, the story world is just a derivative. For broadcasting, its real foundation is actually the real world. The real world is Unit 1, and the rest of the story world is just ancillary products projected based on the real world. Here. This is the main battlefield. Go up and force it out. Su Yuhang shouted into the distance, and then his figure rose again. As a result, the palace was under tremendous pressure. This is not the pressure from the atmosphere, nor the pressure from nature, but the aftertaste of more than 2,000 years involved in the nature and atmosphere of this palace. More than 2,000 years ago, Alexander the Great led his elite army into Egypt. Faced with the group of demons who appeared from the black hole in the sky, Alexander's army also sang a triumphant song and was invincible. In the end, I don't know whether it was because Alexander himself died unexpectedly or because the power of darkness was strengthened and was no longer what the Macedonian Empire could resist. In short, the West was defeated first. A part of the remaining Macedonian Empire army rebelled and became the pioneers of darkness, taking the lead into the east. The first emperor sent a princess to lead a Qin army to Tibet to integrate the local tribes. The princess spent most of her life with the pioneers who were driven into the west. Vampires, angels, werewolves, Templars and other remnant armies of Alexander's empire fought. These are clearly written on the walls of the carriages deep in the Tibetan crypts. The first emperor led his Qin army to sweep across Liuhe, and after destroying the six kingdoms, he continued to attack the surrounding barbarian living areas. Feeding war with war, allowing the Qin army to absorb the blood of the enemy's corpses and grow stronger. After that, when darkness fell in the east, the princess on the front line was defeated first, died in battle together with the Qin army, and her bones were buried in the cave. Subsequently, it should be the first emperor who led the elite of the Qin dynasty to the expedition. There is no specific record or conclusion of the outcome. However, we can tell a lot by looking at the death of Qin II in history and the disappearance of the elites of the Qin Empire who swept through the six countries at the most critical moment of the empire. There's a clue. Like Alexander the Great, the first emperor was also defeated. Therefore, in the so-called history, the Macedonian Empire collapsed, and the Qin Empire was also burned in the fire of a Fang palace. But more than 2,000 years ago, the two great emperors stood up to face the darkness and chose to fight resolutely. Even if the Western army once turned against them, it was only due to the fear and helplessness after the fall of Alexander the Great. So, Suyuhang and Lu Menjiao, one carried the palace, and the other summoned the souls of the Qin army, not to assist in the battle, but to use their breath to re-render the atmosphere of the battlefield that had been dusty for more than 2,000 years. The will to force broadcasting. Appear in the real world. Then. Decisive battle. Boom. 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 There were constant roars from the palace, as if the sky could no longer support their weight, and this height was far lower than that of ordinary civil aviation aircraft. The Qin army behind Lu Menjiao sang magnificent war songs, and the tune of the old Qin opera echoed in the sky again and again, seeming to touch an extremely sensitive nerve. Finally, a black chain appeared from the void. Suyuhang's eyes sparkled with light, and he let out a low roar in his throat. The palace rose again, and at the same time, he smashed forward fiercely. Buzz. The black iron chain collapsed when touched, but an even greater shock followed. Finally, in the sky, a huge black hole appeared. This pothole appeared in both the west and the east more than 2,000 years ago. On the rooftop of a high-rise building in Chengdu, it was still raining. 3 people were standing in the rain without any protection. Li Qi stood at the front, looking at the sky in the distance, while Chen Guang stood beside Li Qi, half a body behind. As for the boss-level old man in the audience, he stood further away, hesitating to speak, with a deep fear. "Sister, tell me, who loses and who wins?" Chen Guang asked. He knew that the answer of the eldest sister must be much clearer than that of the old man. Li Qi smiled, reached out to catch a drop of rainwater outside, put it on her fingertips and rubbed it gently, and said, "Who told you that there will be winners and losers?" Chen Guang frowned, he didn't know what the sentence meant. After hearing this, the old man's face showed a look of confusion at first, but soon showed a shocked expression. Apparently, he understood the implication of Li Qi's words. After a while, Li Qi's eyes narrowed slightly. Apparently, he felt an extremely terrifying force emerging from the sky. Them. Did you successfully force the broadcast out? This aura. Chen Guang's face showed a look of astonishment. Now such obvious and majestic aura fluctuations are no longer limited to the level that can only be sensed by boss-level listeners, and may even be experienced by more sensitive seniors. Everyone can feel an abnormality, and as a high-level listener, Chen Guang naturally felt it. Dark. A despairing darkness appeared in the sky. Chen Guang clenched his fists subconsciously. For the audience, the story world is a training ground, a purgatory, and a gladiatorial arena, while the real world is their home. The dark energy fluctuations appearing on the sky are completely like one plane facing another. A signal of plane invasion. As a creature born in this world, he naturally has a sense of protecting his homeland. Is it darkness? The old man murmured. Is it the darkness that destroyed the Macedonian Empire and the Qin Empire more than 2,000 years ago? Obviously, the boss-level audience still knows a lot of information. Li Ji nodded slightly. Yes, darkness. When Li Ji confirmed this, the old man's face turned pale with fright. He didn't even know what to do now. There was no need to ridicule him that a big-name audience was so unbearable. In fact, all the big-name audiences around the world didn't know what to do now. Basically, this is the sentiment. When the power and aura that is enough to subvert and destroy the real world appears, all the listeners who can sense this aura are horrified. Under the overturned nest, there are intact eggs. No matter how high you stand on this pyramid, but once the pyramid collapses, those who stood taller before often fall the hardest. Chen Guang's body slowly floated, and the old man behind him also slowly floated at this time. After a while, it seemed that everyone made the same choice unanimously and prepared to fight. Hee hee. Li Ji's laughter came out at an inappropriate time. More than 2,000 years ago, both Alexander the Great and the first emperor had an army of more than 100,000 men under their command, which was no less powerful than a high-level audience. But at that time, I was still defeated. What, do you think you can win if you go up on your own now? These words seemed unlikely to come out of Lizzie's mouth. Back then, this woman had gone to England to wipe out a city, and her character had been fixed in the audience circle because of this incident. But now, it seems to be inconsistent with her usual image. So, can those two people compare to the two emperors from more than 2,000 years ago? Even the legions under the emperor, Chen Guang asked with some confusion. Not everyone can be the great emperor. Li Ji shook his head. Besides, the strength of the army under their command at the time, even if all the listeners are gathered together now, is incomparable. Then they. The old man also said doubtfully. Maybe you don't know them, but I believe that besides me, there should be someone. If he knows the process of this matter, he should be able to guess what this man and woman want to do. Li Ji yawned, with a look of disappointment on her face. I spent so much effort to break through the restrictions and rush back. I originally had some expectations, but it's a pity that the development of the situation seems to be no different from what I expected. My trip back was in vain. Uncle Dean, Auntie Dean. You really haven't changed. According to what you said, this laboratory is probably related to your father? And your parents have now come out of the shadows and are preparing to take action against the broadcaster? Are the NPC group bugs in the story world also due to your parents' layout? Hills was shocked after listening to Subai's story. I really didn't expect that you are actually their child. Although it is just a test tube baby, some stories about those two people are also circulated in the Western audience circle. If we compare blood, there should be no one in the audience circle who can compare with you. Someone with a higher blood status, right? By the way, neither Alexander the Great nor your Eastern First Emperor could win that war. Do you think your cheap parents can? You compare them with the two great emperors, Subai said haha disdainfully, shook his head, and continued, I only know that being mean is the pass for the mean, and being noble is the epitaph of the noble. Any doctrine, any organization, any individual, no matter how noble or beautiful the ideal, if it achieves the so-called ideal through bottomless means and calculations, then, let alone the organization or individual, in fact, this ideal, maybe it's dirty to begin with. Alexander the Great and the first emperor both gambled their empires and failed. As for these two people, it is impossible for them to have such noble sentiments and feelings to fight to the death with the radio for freedom. Their goals are the same as their people. Is dirty. Isn't your idea a little too extreme? Hills obviously had some expectations. Extreme. A man and a woman have no feelings but live together as husband and wife. They use their two children as tools to arrange things while hiding for 20 years. What is their purpose? The purpose is to one day step out, give out a cry, carry the flag, fight for the liberation and independence of the audience, and sacrifice yourself for the rest of your life. The purpose is to follow Tan Sitong's example. I am smiling at the sky with my sword across my face, leaving my liver and gallbladder intact, and use my own sacrifice to awaken the spirit of resistance and hope in the entire audience circle? Subai shrugged and laughed first. Do you believe it? Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 846. Has their experiment started? Subai turned around and started to pay attention to the situation there. Although he and Hills naturally had the status of senior listeners after regaining their strength, in the radio story world bug under such circumstances, these non-high-level listeners naturally become existences similar to errand boys. But Hills knows how to behave. Even when he gave orders before, he used the tone of a big brother rather than the tone of ordering subordinates. As for Subai, he was not normal when he entered the second scene anyway. I don't think we should be allowed to repeat the experiment exactly as it is. Chen Ming walked up to Subai and Hills and said, because the rest of the raw materials and instruments in this laboratory are sufficient, but the only thing lacking is the starting point. Raw material. Starting raw material, Subai asked, is it something that comes from high-level listeners? Chen Ming was a little surprised. He knew that Subai had not read the experiment plan, but Subai directly told the key point. Could it be? Is it true that the improvement of life level will also lead to the improvement of wisdom? Yes, it is marked on it. The starting material is the tissue cells of advanced listeners. Chen Ming stretched out his hand. Only you two adults can provide it. That's no problem, Hills replied. The purpose of everyone now is actually to complete the task as soon as possible and get out of the story world where something is obviously wrong. A few cells is like taking half a tube for a blood test in the hospital. A piece of cake. But Chen Ming hesitated at this time. Speak directly if you have anything to say, Subai reminded. It's now time. There's no need to be polite anymore. But the problem is that it must be the cells of two high-level listeners of the opposite sex. The best carrier is a certain amount of blood, but the two adults are both men and do not meet the requirements for starting materials, Chen Ming said with some embarrassment. When he heard the blood of two high-ranking listeners of the opposite sex, Subai's pupils shrank obviously. It seems that my guess was indeed correct. This so-called Zhao's villa is most likely the place where Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiu used to cultivate test tube babies, but that ordinary scientist should also be involved. Is his surname Zhao? Do you still need a female senior audience member? Hill's face immediately darkened. Are you kidding? Where can I find a female senior audience member now? The women present are Lucy, Diana, and Zhao Rui, just these three women. But these three women are not high-level listeners, and Hills can be sure that they are not deliberately hiding their strength. But no, deliberately hiding your strength at this time and delaying the completion of the task is really sick. The rest of the people looked helpless after analyzing the experimental plan. The starting material, as the name suggests, is the main raw material at the beginning, just like if you want to make a carp-baked noodles, no matter how sufficient the other techniques and preparations are. How can you start work if you don't even have a fish? I'm really not an advanced listener. Diana could only say this when facing the questioning looks of several men. I can testify, Zhao Rui said. We can testify to each other. Zhao Rui is a Western magician, and Diana's magical attributes are incompatible with each other. The two are old acquaintances and even old enemies in Western circles, so they naturally understand each other better. You should know what level I am. If I were an advanced listener, I wouldn't be so stupid as to lose in the last scene, Lucy said more bluntly. Then what should we do? Su Gang's temper was a bit irritable. Do we have to wait here until one of these three women gets promoted? Waiting for a veteran to advance to advanced audience. Even if the strength of a veteran at the peak stage is to be advanced, it will require great difficulties and even some opportunities. Not to mention that these three women can only be regarded as the high-level strength of veterans, but they have not yet reached the peak level. God knows when they will advance. No, the ghost said before that the scene can be operated. In other words, if there is no bug in the ghost and it is motionless now, the entire experiment can still be operated. Montari said at this time, we must have overlooked something. Yes, everyone clearly remembers what the ghost said before she died. She meant that letting everyone try this experiment means that the experiment can continue to operate. But among the 9 audience members present, there were only 3 women, and the 2 senior audience members were both men. It was impossible to get the starting materials together, right? It's actually very simple. Sudbai, who had recovered, smiled directly at this time and said, this means that there is a female senior audience member hiding in this place. When Sudbai said these words, everyone including Hills was stunned for a moment. This was indeed a possibility, but no one would think about it. After all, the story world of the 9 people was arranged long ago, and the broadcast was notified in advance. Now a female senior listener appears out of nowhere? Is this really treating the story world as a joke? Although the way the story world looks now does look like a joke. Everyone, search to see if there are any clues nearby. Don't just limit yourself to this laboratory. Anyway, the door has been opened. Search all over the villa. Now that your strength has been restored, it should be easier to find things. Many. Note that it is possible that the female senior audience member is just a dead body. After hearing this, everyone nodded. Some people stayed in the laboratory to continue searching to see if there were any hidden blood specimens, while the rest left the laboratory and went outside to search. Sudbai and Hills walked out of the laboratory, passed through the living room and exited the entrance hall. The old housekeeper disappeared, leaving only a mess in the living room. This made Sudbai frown slightly. It can be imagined that the ghost was definitely not the only one affected. Sudbai and Hills walked in perfect harmony until they left the entrance and walked into the heavy rain. When the two reached the broken bridge, Sudbai suddenly turned around, grabbed Hills's neck with one hand and threw Hills into the muddy water. Hills, who was thrown down, didn't show any anger at all. He just looked at Sudbai with a smile. I knew I couldn't hide it from you. Hill's voice was as usual. I have sucked your blood. No matter how well you disguise it, blood cannot lie. Sudbai stared at Hill's face and said, why didn't you take out your blood just now? Why haven't you revealed your identity as a woman until now? Hills shook his head and said firmly, you can't leave this story world now. You must continue to stay in this story world. Why? Sudbai didn't understand very much. He didn't understand Hill's actions and choices because he couldn't analyze Hill's motives at all. You are a source of radiation and a poisonous fruit. Only if you continue to stay in this story world can the poison continue to spread and exert uninterrupted pressure on the broadcast. Grass. Upon hearing this, Sudbai understood immediately and punched Hills directly in the face. 2 long swords appeared between Hills and Sudbai. The aura of the flying swords collided with the terrifying force of Sudbai's fists. Hills took this opportunity to float up, his figure it fell far away, out of Sudbai's control. He is an intermediate level advanced listener, 1 level higher than Sudbai. The last time the 2 people who represented the historical traditions of the East and the West clashed at the place of enlightenment, although Sudbai won in the end, Sudbai also relied on some luck. In terms of strength, Hills still has a relatively large advantage. You don't need to be so angry. Hills revealed his hands and gently held his two long swords. The sword blades rang slightly, with an elegant and dusty temperament. I really didn't expect that you would be the one who is a man and a woman. Subai looked at the long sword in the opponent's hand. In his memory, Hill's fighting style and many habits were too oriental. For example, the sword Dharma, such as Shen Dharma, did you obtain the inheritance from those two people? Inheritance, Hills thought about the word for a moment, nodded, and said, that's right. According to your Eastern understanding, you should be considered my junior brother. Junior brother, Subai laughed angrily, haha, little junior brother. Subai rushed over again. Hill's figure started to run away. He did not choose to fight Subai head-on, because at this time, he did not need to rush to decide the outcome with Subai. He only needed to drag it. As long as Subai took it, he cannot leave the story world without his own blood. Subai launched 7 or 8 consecutive attacks, but the opponent just chose to retreat. At most, they blocked, but they did not get close to him at all. In the end, Subai had to stop himself. Why? Yes. Why? Even though you have received the inheritance of that man and woman, you are still helping them at this time. What is your purpose? Don't tell me that those two people moved you and asked you to help them now. Because I want to see higher and further, Hill said seriously, work hard to advance and understand. What is the ultimate goal? Hills shrugged and continued, it's just to improve your life level. Now, there is such a shortcut and opportunity in front of you. You will jump up to an unimaginable level and truly see the world and everything clearly. Sorry. I can't refuse this temptation. I once told you that in the real world, I am a biological researcher, and people who devote themselves to biology often have a persistent and even morbid desire to explore life and the unknown that is difficult for others to understand. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 847. Actually, I can feel that you don't have such a decisive rejection of broadcasting. In fact, you are also very close to broadcasting. In fact, you can completely fulfill your current identity and role, as long as they can start the first with the same goal. From now on, you and I will have the opportunity to walk on the same path. Hills persuaded Subai sincerely, without any pretense or hypocrisy. You want me to take the initiative to seek integration with broadcasting like you? Subai pointed at himself and then at Hills. I'm sorry, I'm not interested. As he spoke, lines of blood began to appear on Subai's body, and a deep and terrifying aura was brewing. Hills frowned slightly. She could feel that Subai seemed to be preparing to burn all his roots in exchange for a duel with her. She didn't understand this idea, let alone Subai's stubbornness. Your life should not be limited to hatred for that man and woman. If you give up the opportunity to glimpse the true mystery of life in the universe, I really feel sorry for you. Hills also slowly began to do well. Prepared. With the result of the last duel, even though Hills knew that he had the advantage, he did not dare to be careless at all. I finally got that person out of my mind. How could I still eagerly walk the same path he walked? Subai's eyes were slowly turning red. I am myself, my name is Subai. Yes, I do have a similar DNA relationship with that man and woman, but I will not be grateful to them for giving me life. Even if they can really integrate with the radio this time, I will definitely find it in the future. Peel them out of their consciousness, and then burn them with undead flames, letting them taste the filial piety of being sons. It's so childish. Hills shook his head, his momentum suddenly increased. At this time, Subai shouted loudly, she is a woman. I will try to hurt her to get blood. You can use it for experiments, and I will be responsible for taking care of her. Still very childish. Hills knew that Subai was informing other listeners here, but she didn't care, because she didn't think that if she insisted on resisting, even if Subai killed 1,000 enemies, he would harm himself. Even if he got his own blood after being injured in the form of 800, he wouldn't be able to let the experiment proceed smoothly. I don't know who is naive. I know clearly that I am me. I have gone through a lot of hard work to find my complete memory and complete self. No matter whether the physical body exists or not, whether the physical body is real or fake, but I cherish my own life. Your consciousness and identity survive every day and every moment, and you, as if you have been brainwashed by a cult, want to burn yourself and dedicate yourself to the so-called gods. Speaking of this, Subai suddenly laughed and spit. The problem is, you don't know yet whether the broadcast will disapprove of it or not. Broadcasting has no choice. Fusion is a win-win for it. Moreover, you don't know how huge your parents' layout is. Your parents are the greatest people I have ever met. Great, Subai chewed the word. Those two people ignored family ties and used their own flesh and blood as tools to maximize their use. They used up their sister's body in order not to leave any traces and let her go home. Rotten, all kinds of things, all kinds of unscrupulous means, all kinds of bottomless things. It's actually possible to get the title of great here. Alexander and Ying Zheng more than 2,000 years ago, didn't they know that there was an option for active fusion? Subai walked towards Hills step by step. There is really no harm if there is no comparison. So, this is the bargaining chip. Hills watched Subai approaching him step by step. He continued calmly, as the two people who have gone the furthest in the past 20 years, they chose to end in this way, can completely break the spine of the audience for the next 20 or even 50 years in one fell swoop. At the same time, they can also pull out and consume the hidden dangers left over 2,000 years. These are the bargaining chips exchanged with broadcasting. It really fits their style. The distance between Subai and Hills was only 10 meters. At this distance, Subai stopped. Facing Subai, who suddenly stopped, a trace of doubt in Hills's eyes disappeared briefly. She didn't feel that Subai had been persuaded by her, but it seemed that the murderous intention and anger in Subai had really subsided at this time. Many. How is this going? What is interesting? What is boring? A question came from behind Hills, and Hills was shocked. She didn't realize that there was a person standing quietly behind her. But when Hills was about to step away from this position, a hand suddenly grabbed his shoulder. Boom! The entire ground shook violently at this moment, and Hill's figure was forcibly pressed back. The old butler put his confused and haggard face on Hill's shoulder and stared at Hills in confusion. What is interesting and what is boring? Damn it, how is this possible? How could this old guy still move? This story world, no, the entire story world should have crashed due to bugs. Why is this old man still able to move? What is interesting and what is boring? The old butler seemed not to give up until he got the answer, holding Hills tightly with his arms. Subai's figure began to rush towards Hills quickly. At this time, if he didn't know how to take action, then Subai would really have wasted his time. A shadow of a snake appeared between Hill's eyebrows. At the same time, the coercion belonging to Yamata no Orakai emitted, and terrifying air waves and scorching burning power poured out. The old butler's hand slowly separated from Hill's shoulders, but the next moment, the old butler let out a low growl in his throat, and his hands were firmly clasped on Hill's shoulders again. Hill's body shook for a while, and the phantom of the big snake between his eyebrows began to fade away. Blood overflowed from the pores on the old housekeeper's body, and he almost turned into a bloody man, and his own aura was slowly falling. Fall down. The strength of the old butler is equivalent to that of high-level listeners and low-level listeners. In the first scene, all the listeners were ordinary people, and the old butler's strength was enough for him to keep the game running. But now, with the old butler's strength, it was obviously impossible to trap Hills, who had recovered his strength, but he did it. But the sacrifice for this was huge. Puff. Subai's arm pierced directly into Hill's chest. Hot blood flowed out and was absorbed by the nail of Subai's ring finger. Then, Sudbai's own blood entered another nail. At this time, Sudbai's fingernails were very long, and his ancient zombie body gave him all the characteristics of a high-level zombie. Hills let out a sharp roar and slashed Sudbai's neck with both swords. Sudbai was not eager to fight, nor did he intend to continue to expand the results of the battle with Hills to quickly fight to the death like the one in the Land of Enlightenment. Withdrawing his arm, 2 nails fell off and were thrown towards the entrance by Sudbai. "Go experiment." Boom. There was a roar, and Sudbai flew backwards and hit a rock wall heavily, while Hills was shaken by the splash of mud and water. This time, because the old butler spared no effort to imprison Hills' body, Sudbai accomplished his goal. At the same time, he severely injured Hills with one hand, and the injuries he suffered when he was counterattacked were basically the same. It's not worth mentioning anymore. Sudbai slipped down from the rock wall and stood in the mud. At the entrance in the distance, Mentalai and Su Gang were still standing there looking around. The others should have gone to do experiments, and these two should be I am brave enough to watch the confrontation between two high-level listeners. Although they cannot understand the whole thing, this does not prevent them from maximizing their own interests in the chaotic situation. Hills covered the wound on his chest with one hand, and held a sword in the other hand, and began to walk towards the villa. This scene made Muntali and Su Gang standing at the entrance feel at a loss for a moment. Sudbai came over and got stuck between Hills and the villa. "Do we still want to continue?" Sudbai asked. "I don't know what the meaning of what we are doing now is." Hills remained unmoved, just looked at Sudbai coldly, and at the same time, raised his sword. "Is the old housekeeper dead?" Sudbai looked at the old housekeeper's body lying on the ground over there. "I don't know why he can still move, but I can probably guess why he targeted you. Because he is a product created by broadcasting. Even if the broadcasting temporarily loses control of the story world, he will still subconsciously do what he thinks is beneficial to the broadcasting. He is he. But what about us? The things outside may be almost over now, or may even be over. No matter what the outcome is, it doesn't seem to have any impact on us. What's the point of the two of us fighting to the death here?" Hills grinned. "Yeah, there's no point." As soon as he finished speaking, Hill's split mouth began to enlarge continuously, and the whole face split open. A black python flew out of Hill's mouth and pounced directly on Sudbai. Sudbai moved his hands forward and grabbed the python's head. The toxins on the python began to react violently with the zombie aura on Sudbai's body. For a moment, a thick smoke and stench filled the air. "Does it make sense to you to keep being played with as a toy and then die in an unknown way?" The python's eyes released a soul voice, which was Hills's voice, with a deep questioning. "And hysteria, don't say you want to resist the radio, because I know that even if you are mentally ill, you still don't have the courage to truly stand on the opposite side of the radio. So, your persuasion. Ridiculous. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 848. It's probably because of the continuous coding for more than a year, or maybe it's because of the second half of the plot. In short, there are various reasons. When I just wrote the last chapter, Long was thinking in his heart, "Damn, what the hell was written?" I endured this emotion and wrote it, and finally chose to publish it for free, because as my first reader, Long himself was too embarrassed to release the plot and ask for subscription money from everyone. According to Long's original expectation, this was a big uproar, which could be regarded as a high-end plot. But I'm sorry, Long felt that he didn't write it well. There were objective reasons, such as being too tired and exhausted, and there were also subjective reasons, which was this plot. It is indeed not that easy to control. Long Yu forced himself to maintain the amount of updates he has been doing and is really running out of energy. Now, if you are not careful at all, you may end up writing a book that will completely collapse. But there is still a long time before the end of Dragon, and this is not the end of Dragon design. The problem with this volume is that the level of foreshadowing is not enough, the plot connection is abrupt, and the rhythm has lost some control, causing the characters in it to become distorted, especially by Max, who has become like a spectator. Oops, he is also drunk. But the big plot left before the life experience and layout were fully laid out. Therefore, I plan to spend about a week re-editing this volume. I will start re-editing it from the end of the first scene in Zhao's villa when Subai's parents come out of the shadows. The re-edited chapters will be marked with re-edited titles and set to be free. Horror Broadcast has been Long's hard work for more than a year. Long doesn't want to leave any regrets at this time. The last book Horror Net was a huge hit, with an overwhelming number of updates every day, even if he felt that something was wrong. No matter what the problem is, it is still overwhelmed by the amount of updates every day. I bite the bullet and continue to write, leaving a big regret. You can't fall into the same pit twice. Internet writing is called fast food literature, but even if a stone is held on the chest for a year, it will be warm, let alone a story typed out word by myself. In addition, some readers may misunderstand that Long has stopped updating in the name of rebuilding. Let's put it this way, even if Long continues to write in a daze, every chapter is a subscription, every chapter is money, and he has income every day. For most readers, they may just feel that the writing is a bit messy, but they will continue to subscribe if they should. It will take more than a week to rewrite this volume. During this time, I will set the rewritten chapter as a free chapter, which means that Long will have no income for more than a week. Long just wants to correct it. I am responsible for my own hard work, and I want to be responsible for the readers who have followed it for more than a year and have formed the habit of reading updates every day. If there is any funny guy in the book review area who wants to spray the dragon, please help the dragon spray him to death. There will be an update tomorrow, and it will be free. It will be a rewritten chapter starting from the story about Subai's parents coming out. After the rewritten story is over, Long will continue to release paid chapters. Finally, I hope everyone will understand. In fact, it is really a pity. I can only say that I was too immature in the past. If I had the courage to stop and rewrite it when I was writing the horror internet article, maybe the horror internet article would not be unfinished in the end. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiao Long. Chapter 849. Subai sat on the sofa and watched the old housekeeper force Lucy, Muntali, Diana, Sugang, and Chenming into the wall one after another. Not everyone could keep standing like hills. They looked very stiff and silent, and there was no need for them to pretend to be tragic or strong at this time. After all, who can it be shown to? Seeing him building Isolo, watching him entertaining guests, watching his tower collapse. Rational reasoning, thinking, and bloody and brutal violent punishment constantly appear alternately in this scene. The former pave the way for the latter, and the latter renders the former. The contrast in emotion and rhythm. It seems to be in line with the storytelling that radio pursues, or the aesthetics of radio. Trampling carefully woven things to pieces, that kind of wasteful behavior can often bring a kind of pleasure that stimulates people's hearts. It is human nature to pursue beautiful things, but seeing beautiful things burn in front of oneself and distortion is also the work of the devil hidden in people's hearts. Subai poured himself another cup of tea, and then poured a cup for the old housekeeper who had finished his work. For some reason, Subai felt that the current old housekeeper seemed a bit too easygoing. Even though he had just squeezed the person into meat and blood soaked into the wall, Subai still felt that the old housekeeper seemed to have changed a lot from before. At first, during the contact, Subai remembered that he thought the other party was a machine NPC created by broadcasting. Because according to broadcast's gaming habits, on the one hand, it controls the natives who have reached a certain level of strength in the story world under high pressure. At the same time, in order to reduce risks, broadcast will deliberately create some restrictions for these natives. For example, the Pope in the previous story world of Cinderella, the setting given by the broadcast prevented the Pope from embarking on the path of hating heaven and earth to resist to the greatest extent. The old housekeeper picked up the tea, took a sip, and then smiled, with a look of nostalgia on his face. It seemed that from the moment he asked himself about the plan on the roof, he began to become completely different from the cold and indifferent before. "Do I need to be squeezed into?" Subai pointed to himself and asked. Although this body is not his own, the senses are still the same. If he had a choice, Subai felt it was best not to go through such a thing. "No, didn't you find that door?" the old housekeeper said to Subai. "As the winner of the game, you should receive some preferential treatment." "Thanks." "You're welcome." The old housekeeper sat down opposite Subai. He looked at Subai as if he were looking at an antique, because people who appreciate antiques are used to comparing an unfamiliar antique with something they already know and know. Compare the ancient artifacts to find the differences and similarities, and you can infer a lot of useful information. Subai took a deep breath and drank all the tea in the cup in his hand, indicating that he was ready and could go. "Please." The old housekeeper put the teacup down and motioned for Subai to follow him upstairs. Subai did not hesitate and followed the old housekeeper to the second floor. The two of them walked towards the deepest room, which was the room where Hills discovered the passage. The old housekeeper reached out and moved the bed away, and walked down the corridor with Subai. The metal door in front of him had a heavy and depressing feeling inherent in this material. The old housekeeper stood in front of him and verified his fingerprints first and then his pupils. Click. A crisp sound. The door was opened. It was pitch black inside. The old housekeeper turned sideways and motioned for Subai to come in. Subai smiled and took 2 steps forward. When he was about to enter, he stopped and looked at the old housekeeper. "This scene is over, so what are you going to do next?" The old housekeeper looked at Subai and replied, "I'm going to clean the house, especially the kitchen. You made a mess there." This was a farewell to the old housekeeper. Subai turned around and walked in the door. When the old butler standing behind Subai watched Subai go in, it was like a flower in front of his eyes. He seemed to see a blue flame, but the flame slowly disappeared as Subai disappeared. The old housekeeper's task was over. He covered the corridor and the bed again, and then walked out of the room. Then, he picked up the broom and mop, preparing to clean the entire villa first. He didn't use the clone, because if he used the clone, no matter how much work he had to do, he could finish it quickly. He likes this kind of work, and likes to slowly repair and restore the traces produced after a game, and hopes that this process can be as long as possible. Perhaps. It's probably because it's too boring. However, when the old housekeeper came to the stairs with a bucket and mop, he suddenly frowned. He looked at the living room below, at the dining room and kitchen, and at the bedroom that had been occupied like a small hotel. At last, he looked at the blood-red wall, and suddenly he felt disgusted. It was as if there was a fire burning in his chest. He knew this feeling shouldn't happen, but he couldn't control it. After a while, the old housekeeper dropped the mop and placed the bucket on the steps. He slowly walked down the stairs and sat down on the sofa in the living room again. In the teapot in front of him, the tea Subai brewed had already gone cold, but the old butler still added another cup for himself. Once the tea had cooled down, it didn't have that much flavor, but the old butler still seemed to drink it with gusto. While drinking tea, he looked at the living room, the walls, and every furnishing here again, with doubt and confusion on his face. Of course he is familiar with this place, because he has been in the scene for a long time, but at this moment, there seems to be a strange sense of familiarity that is constantly overriding the original memory. In a daze, the old housekeeper raised his head and looked at the stairs on the second floor. He seemed to see a man in white research clothes coming out and shouting to him. "Uncle Joe, is the meal ready? I'm starving to death." "Master." The old butler's originally cloudy eyes regained focus. Of course, there was no one on the second floor, because he knew that his young master was no longer here, but he was still guarding the villa, but he had become a toy in the hands of others. Or it would be more accurate to call it a tool. The old housekeeper seemed much older at this time. He slowly got up from the sofa and walked to the kitchen. There is an empty room next to the kitchen, which is the old housekeeper's own room. The young master once asked him to live upstairs, but he insisted on living in the cramped room next to the kitchen. He took out the key and opened the door to the room. When the audience wanted to go in here to check, the old housekeeper just said that this is my room and there is no evidence or clues in it. The audience just passed this room because the role of the old butler in the game is the host, an absolutely impartial existence. If he says there is no problem here, then there must be no problem. There is only one bed and a small wardrobe in the room, which is just such a big place. The old housekeeper sat down beside his bed and took out a box from under the bed. There was a stack of photos in the box. The old housekeeper pursed his lips, reached out and picked up the photos, and when he unfolded them in front of him, he found that the photos were in front of him. It was all gray, as if it had been deliberately erased. Of course the old housekeeper knew who erased it. He couldn't remember it before, but now he was holding these photos and looking at them one by one, as if the photos had returned to their original appearance in his mind. As he watched, 2 lines of blood and tears fell from the old housekeeper's eyes. The old housekeeper took out the last photo, which had not been erased. "This is a family photo. This family is a friend of the young master." The old housekeeper remembered that time when he and the young master went to visit that friend, and the friend suddenly said to take a family photo. The scene in the photo is very strange. A young man is kneeling in the corner, and there is a bronze box between the couple. The old butler felt a little uncomfortable when he took this photo. He was responsible for finding the angle and pressing the shutter, but he didn't take it seriously because he knew that his young master also had a laboratory, and things would be transported in every once in a while. Being transported out, the old housekeeper knew that what was being transported out were corpses of different ages and sizes. No matter how weird things are, if you see them too often, you won't take them seriously. The old housekeeper thinks that the young master's friend may be doing the same kind of experiments as the young master, and that friend often comes to the villa's laboratory to communicate with the young master. What? Holding the only clear photo in his hand and looking at it, the old housekeeper looked at the young man kneeling in the corner. The look between his brows slowly overlapped with that of the person he had just seen. No wonder. No wonder he looks familiar to me. The old housekeeper knew that something seemed wrong today, because he had too many things on his mind and spent too much time melancholy, but he did not do anything else. He just continued to sit by his bed, holding the photo, and continued reading through them one by one. He took out the only photo that could be seen clearly and put it aside. He continued to flip through the stack of completely white photos, looking at it very seriously and with great concentration, as if his last thoughts were echoing in his ears. A conversation when seeing the young master. "Uncle Joe, I succeeded, ha 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 ha, I succeeded, I am really a genius." Of course the young master is a genius. "You know, I worked out this poison with great difficulty. It can poison even gods. Do you believe it? I have done experiments. It can really poison gods. It is true. I believe it." "No, no, no, Uncle Joe, you don't understand. This is not used to poison dogs, nor is it used to poison people. Even gods are not worthy of being treated with this poison. This poison is used to poison people, an indescribable thing, bigger than the sky. I don't understand, but I know that the young master can do anything. If you still don't believe me, forget it. Let's eat first. I'm going to call Su Yuhang and ask him to bring the poison container. Master, you really did it? It was poisoned by you, and I can't move. The old housekeeper just sat by the bed, flipping through the photos slower and slower. Finally, the whole person stood still. Keep this posture. Motionless. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 850. Humans are social animals, and this social nature was reflected in the formation of tribes a long time ago, because when everyone gathers together, they can more effectively resist wild beasts and go out for hunting. With the development of productivity, the social nature of human beings has begun to become more and more refined. The development of productivity has made the most basic food, clothing, and housing no longer an urgent issue for most people, let alone the first element of their struggle. And therefore, the human spiritual world begins to seek self and unique identity. The larger ones are similar to ancient mercenaries and later parties, the smaller ones are like brotherhoods and elite societies, and the smaller ones can even be reduced to the fan base of a book or a movie. Human beings like to use a circle to draw themselves together with the people they identify with. This is an instinct and a tendency. The same is true for the circle of listeners, and the same is true for other circles. Su Yuhang parked the car on the side of the road. There were a row of private cars and taxis parked on the opposite road. In fact, many car owners who drive online car-hailing companies used to drive taxis. In some places, the two parties can live in harmony. The local areas are in conflict, and there are endless fights and group fights. However, although Nantong is a coastal city, it is nothing more than a small place. Here, everyone gets along quite harmoniously. Sanyu restaurant has only 2 small shops with about a dozen small tables outside. It sells nothing more than fast food lunch boxes. It is considered the first choice place for lunch and dinner for the nearby generation of taxi drivers. Sanyu is a customary term used by the locals, which means that the boss is the third eldest child in the family. In Nantong dialect, people who are close to each other are usually followed by the word ho. Those who are the eldest children in the family are preceded by the words 3, 4, if it is an only child, add ho after the last character of the name. As soon as Su Yuhang got off the car, several masters waved and shouted, "Hang ho, here you come." Su Yuhang was not used to this title every time, but he had no choice but to walk over and order a box lunch. There was no need to pay for it, but he had to keep accounts and make monthly settlements first. Sanyu, the owner of Sanyu Hotel, used to drive a taxi. A few years ago, he encountered a murder and robbery case. Sanyu happened to drive by. He went down to show his courage and subdued the murderer, but he also suffered several stab wounds on his body. He was injured and disabled and could no longer drive his car, so he and his wife opened a small restaurant. Fortunately, Sanyu was a good person before, and he was also cheerful and like a big brother in the taxi industry. The reason for the accident was because of this, so the masters in this area basically came here deliberately to get their own meals. The problem is, some people will come here to eat even if they are far away. As time goes by, the entrance of Sanyu Hotel has become the first choice for residents of several nearby communities to take taxis. Anyway, it is difficult to take taxis elsewhere during meals, but when it comes there are a lot of cars here, and the chef will finish cooking the food immediately and then continue to take care of business. 1 portion of roasted pork with potatoes, 1 portion of fried chrysanthemum, 1 portion of tomatoes and eggs and 2 portions of rice. Su Yuhang read the newspaper while eating. He didn't mind hanging out with these drivers and masters, but how much do you want him to do? It's basically impossible to have a heart-to-heart relationship. Hang Hao, Hang Hao. Su Yuhang raised his head and found that it was Zhu Laozi in front of him calling him. Hang Hao, Everyone says your calligraphy is good, right? Su Yuhang smiled and nodded. My child is about to learn calligraphy. The cram school teacher at school doesn't have much time to teach. If you have time, come to my brother's house to help me teach the child. I'll have a meal and a drink. If it doesn't work, my brother will help you. A night train, okay, a meal and a drink are considered normal favors, while a night train is an income of at least a few $100s. The key is to stay up all night. Even a master chef doesn't like to squeeze himself to make money. Zhu, the fourth child, is quite sincere. Tomorrow, I will help you take a look tomorrow, Su Yuhang replied. Well, okay. Zhu Laozi immediately sat down and continued eating after getting a satisfactory answer. Oh, I heard that there was a man over at Xiaoshiqiao who installed a big safe in his house. He trapped himself in it without bringing his mobile phone. As a result, he starved to death and died of thirst. A driver chatted. He remembered the new news he heard. Drivers are the ones who have the most contact with people from all walks of life. Generally speaking, when outsiders come over and ask where there are entertainment venues that are not suitable for children, most of the local drivers know what they know. Of course, they also have a lot of gossip and news that is not convenient for newspapers. Really? Why is this person so stupid? Fake it, tell it a story. What did I lie to you about? That guy over at Xiaoshiqiao was a little mentally ill. He always felt that someone was trying to steal his money. As a result, he divorced his wife and his children ended up in the house. He installed a big safe and went in by himself. In the end, he only found out about it when his father came to see him half a month later. Half a month later, the smell was terrible. Haha, isn't it suicide? How could it be suicide? It was just an accident. I accidentally locked myself in, cried, shouted, and drank my own urine. In short, I either committed suicide intentionally or trapped myself to death. Hey, Hang Hao, you don't want to eat? A driver on the other side saw Su Yuhang, who had just sat down and stood up again and walked to the other side of the road. My stomach feels a little uncomfortable and I can't eat anymore. You guys eat. Su Yuhang waved his hand, got into his car directly, and then drove away. After driving a certain distance, Su Yuhang pulled over, lit a cigarette, and took a heavy drag. At the same time, in an ordinary apartment bedroom, the man who had been lying quietly on the bed slowly opened his eyes at this time. The man's face was exactly the same as Su Yuhang's, but he was exuding, it was an abyss-like gloom. The man stretched out his hand and a mirror appeared in front of him. The rear-view mirror of Su Yuhang's car showed the appearance of a man. It's like looking into a mirror, but although the two people inside and outside the mirror look exactly the same, they have completely different temperaments. There's something wrong with you, the man in the mirror said, I need you to fix it. You are not a broadcaster, and I am not your NPC. I am you, and you are me. You have no right to order me like this, even if you can easily destroy me. Su Yuhang shook his head and looked at himself in the mirror, without any fear on his face. You are emotionally disturbed. You have to live in the real world as my identity. You cannot have the slightest disorder, the man in the mirror reminded, I am not ordering you. You are right. You are me and so am I you, I can't order you, but there are some things that you should be aware of. Property, Su Yuhang smiled and threw the cigarette butt out of the window nonchalantly. I just heard a story. A guy locked himself in a safe and starved himself to death. When he was found, it's already half a month later. Su Yuhang took a deep breath, opened his palms, looked at them, and continued, does it sound familiar? Are you thinking of Zhao? The man in the mirror said calmly. In this life, there are really not many people that I can consider friends. Lu Menjiao is half, but Zhao is one. I can ignore my parents, ignore my children, and I can use anyone, but only that young master. I feel very sorry for you. At this time, you should not be distracted by this. The man in the mirror reminded again, you are an ordinary person's personality separated from the subjective consciousness, and I am the personality that controls the power in the subjective consciousness. I watched every move on the broadcast. You replaced the identity activities in the real world. But you and I should be very clear that we are not separated from the subjective consciousness, but copied. Once the subjective consciousness decides to wake up, you and I will cease to exist. I don't know what you mean by this. But I know that you can't have the guts to resist the subjective consciousness. Why, do you expect that after the subjective consciousness awakens, you and I have helped him in the real world for so many years? For the sake of continuing to operate an identity that helps him keep watching the broadcast diligently so that he can have a good night's sleep, give us a chance to continue to exist. The man in the mirror was silent. Don't be stupid, you should know what kind of person you are, and I also know what kind of person I am, so don't have any expectations or illusions about the subject's consciousness. When he wakes up, we will be erased. This is a reality we have known for a long time. Okay, now that I've calmed down, you can continue to turn your attention to the radio. Su Yuhang honked the horn and smiled. Take good care of it, the man in the mirror said. Ye Yinzi has almost reached the end of its growth. The day when the poison is actually released is not far away. Therefore, the time for the main body's consciousness to awaken is also very close. Even, maybe tomorrow, maybe tonight. What happened? Su Yuhang asked, staring at the mirror. He was only responsible for life in the real world. Therefore, he did not know about the things on the radio and Yao Yinzi. Another personality like ours has been expelled from his memory by Yao Yinzi. The broadcast even designed a story world specifically for this purpose to assist. But in any case, broadcasting has begun to be afraid. The initially confident broadcasting began to intentionally intervene to correct the medicine that it had taken the initiative to swallow because of its overconfidence. This is welcome news. But there is another piece of news that is not very gratifying, that is, Yao Yinzi's growth rate is somewhat beyond imagination, and the subjective consciousness will not allow him to become the second Lichi, giving him another chance to escape his fate. Hearing this, Su Yuhang seemed very free and easy, and took the initiative to close the order-taking software, then relaxed his neck. It means that we are very close to the time when we will be erased. Then I have to go back early and write 2 more words. Painted a few more paintings. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 851. Gudu, Gudu, Gudu. After walking into the door, Subai felt that his consciousness fell into a quagmire, surrounded by a greasy and dull feeling, and he was like a specimen soaked in formalin, rising and falling, involuntarily. You can feel your own existence, but you can't use the slightest consciousness. Your hands. Your feet. Even your pores. None of it is under your control. You are a puppet, but the biggest tragedy for a puppet and a puppet is that your own consciousness is born. You have yourself but no freedom. In a daze, Subai seemed to hear someone speaking in his ear. The voice was vague at first, but slowly began to become clear, as if it came from a distant but vague boundary. I said, Lao Su, you are really capable. Is this your son? How did you know? You have been tested here, and I keep your genetic samples here. Although your genetic sequence has been changed to be completely different from ordinary people, some of the most basic things will not change or will change very little. Since this kid wants me to plant toxins in him, of course he needs to undergo a comprehensive examination. I really discovered the similarities between his and your sequences. You really used your own son as a drug introduction. You are cruel enough. It's just a test tube baby. As you said, he only has a small amount of genetic similarity with me. In fact, he doesn't have much other relationship with me. Yes, yes, I know, but this kind of thoughts and ideas are often only those of the most cutting-edge scientists. Their thinking mode of seeing and understanding things is different from ordinary people. For example, my wife spent a lot of money, he put a lot of effort into making a cake for himself, but what came to his mind was the molecular formula of the substances that make up the cake. Looking at his daughter, he thought about the arrangement patterns measured by the PCR machine. This is also the happiness of being an ordinary person, just like being an emperor. Heavens, heartless and hateful to be born in an emperor's family are actually not completely innocent. Scientists who really study the subtle fields often have the ability. It's similar to the mentality of an emperor, but you, old Su, do you really think of yourself as a god? Why did our young master Zhao suddenly become interested today and want to discuss ethical philosophy with me? It's not because you brought your son here. Go on, that one will accept him only if he is my son. That majestic existence full of confidence. Yes, full of confidence. It's really interesting. I'll probably die after this one is done, right? There is a high probability that he will become someone like me. No, 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 no matter how confident it is, it won't dare to accept me. If I were turned into a person like you, I would be better than you, Su Yuhang, and I would have more ways to resist it and then kill it. It seems that you are more conceited than it is. Wait and see, didn't you tell me the alternative story of Alexander the Great and Qin Shi Huang? What does this mean? It shows that there are still beings in the human race that can make it fearful. Therefore, I don't think it is surprising that a me appears. After all, it has been more than 2,000 years. Then how do you know it's a reincarnation of more than 2,000 years? Old Su, you know, fighting is sometimes a kind of fun. Even if there are other people who have done similar things to me in the past 2,000 years, they must have failed and their final end will be miserable, but life would be boring if there was no pressure, right? I have more money than I can spend in a few lifetimes, and it's not money I got from stocks or banks. If I hadn't met you, Lao Su, and hadn't joined you in this matter, I guess my life would be meaningless. Okay, let's stop chatting. The initial injection of toxin was successful and it shouldn't have much impact on the child. Because the level of the toxin is so high that he can't feel it at all, but there is one problem I have to remind you first. Explain. You are planning to send this child on the same path as you, right? If this child becomes like you in the future, similar to a god, then he may trigger the poison on his own, so you have to be careful. How can you be so sure that this child will? After all, he is your Lao Su seed. Even if you did not use the original mating method and was not born from the first mother's 10-month pregnancy, in essence, there is no difference. He is your Lao Su seed. There is no way too bad. Moreover, I believe his maternal DNA is not that of an ordinary woman, right? With your aloofness, old Su, you wouldn't just find a random woman and be done with it. Actually, even if he is stupid and unbearable, it will be difficult for him to die, because as long as the person accepts him with confidence, he will definitely wait for the moment when the poison takes effect. Maybe, the person will be afraid, but before there is real fear, it is with a mentality of playing with fire. Actually, what I want to say is, Lao Su, I don't know if you will regret it in the future. Really, he is your son after all. The relationship between father and son is really unpredictable sometimes. Maybe one day, he will grow up. When he gets older, you may regret it when you face him. My normal lifespan is unlimited, so I don't need to pass on incense like ordinary people. This is a very boring thing for me. For my plan, anything can be sacrificed. Including me. When I brought you into this plan to do this experiment, your fate was already determined. I'm sorry, but now I'm far from capable of protecting you in front of it. Don't be sorry, I like to do exciting things, and I've even been fantasizing about the reasonable way it would allow me to die naturally. I also hope you can succeed. By the way, since you know that thing will if you accept him, why do you need to have two sons to exchange bodies and souls? I think this is unnecessary and a complete waste of energy. No, if there is a pit in front of you, it will not jump into it, and the rules will not allow it to jump in. I understand it, and I understand it. It is like a program with self-awareness, with a little bit of belonging. Own likes and dislikes. If there is a clear pit ahead, even if it is willing to jump into it, the rules and procedures will not allow it to do so, because the rules and procedures will autonomously avoid risks and chaos and will not allow itself to take the initiative to walk into risks. So the reason you did this is just to give it a face? Cover the pit with leaves and give it a step. That's the truth. Oh, very good, it's really an interesting game, but I believe that it will be scared and afraid when the time comes. I believe in you. Look, I just said that existence will not turn me into a person like you. It doesn't dare. You will find that I may die naturally and unexpectedly in a few days. Instead of becoming your peers. This is the best proof. So what you're saying is that I have to expect you to die, right? Theoretically, it's true. Only when I die can I prove my value and prove that it is afraid of me. I am really like a painter, and the value of my works can only be appreciated after death. How long will it take for this to be over? It won't take long. The toxin has been injected. I need to spend some time to confirm. There shouldn't be any big problems. There is nothing wrong with the little girl you brought here before, but there is a little flaw. What flaw? You said you want to inject your spiritual will into their memories. Well, although I don't know your specific method, I can transform abstract things into data. That girl has no direct relationship with you. Relationship, and this boy is your son. I think that in terms of success rate and rejection rate, your plan has a higher probability of success on this boy than on a girl. Do you have any suggestions? Suggestion? Deepen the memory and deepen the traces of your existence as much as possible for these two children. The heavier the traces of your existence in their lives, the stronger their dependence and identification with you will be. This makes it easier to implement your objections and control them. And this sense of identity, I think, is not just beautiful things. Human beings always choose to forget the beauty they are accustomed to, just like children always ignore their parents' love for them. I agree with Shakespeare's point of view, what can move people's hearts the most is tragedy. Tragedy. Yes, it's a tragedy. Rather than giving them much love, it's better to deliberately create a sense of hatred. Hatred is difficult to get rid of. Interesting. It's fun. I'll leave for a while, and when the kid is taken care of, I'll pick him up. I don't want to steal your son. Subai only felt that the conversation in his ears slowly became blurred and became farther away. But I don't know why. He suddenly felt that outside of the turbid and thick liquid around him, there is a face. He is silently approaching himself, as if the other person is already in front of him, but he cannot open his eyes to see him, nor can he feel him, but the other person's eyes seem to have a power that can pierce the heart. Did you hear what I just said? Your Uncle Zhao and I are very optimistic about you. Buzz. Subai raised his head suddenly, and in an instant his consciousness regained control of his body. But there was no one in front of him, only 9 identical glassware arranged here. Here. It's the Underground Research Institute of Zhao's Villa. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 852. Hoo-hoo, 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 hoo-hoo. The surroundings were very quiet, but one could clearly hear the sound of breathing and the gurgling sound that came from that time. Subai seemed to be the first to wake up. However, when he tried to break free from the constraints of this petri dish, he found that his power could not be released at all. It was as if there was a barrier or seal that blocked all his power. All suppressed. This seal is very overbearing. It is pervasive and everywhere, almost completely blocking any way you can use your special power. Sudbai raised his hands with difficulty and groped around, but there was no switch button inside the incubator. This was natural. After all, this was an incubator specially designed for human in vivo experiments. It was certainly impossible to place any buttons inside. In order to allow the living body to escape, this is equivalent to the fact that the electronic switch of the prison door is generally set outside the door. But I don't know why, it seems that the longer he stayed awake in this cramped and narrow space, the uneasiness and restlessness in Sudbai's heart became more and more intense. At first, he became an ordinary person and knew that this was a game, so it didn't matter. But now Sudbai knew that his body was actually his own body, but his power was inexplicably sealed, because of the inconsistency caused by the lack of power. A sense of confidence can indeed affect people's emotions. Moreover, for Sudbai, his greater uneasiness is because he can feel that the power to seal himself does not seem to come from outside influence but from within himself. Even now the power cannot be exerted, but Sudbai can still see inside the situation inside his body. At this time, layers of white mucosal substances are secreted out of your body in a strange way, and your body is repeatedly coated with paraffin layer after layer. It seems bright, but what you originally have is working with you. Travel further and further. Plop. All 9 incubators were suddenly opened at this time, and the liquid inside flowed out, and all the people inside fell to the ground. Everyone was lying on the ground. For a while, muffled sounds and sounds of surprise came one after another. Sudbai's pupils shrank slightly. Am I not the only one whose power has been sealed? Sure enough, Hills was the first to stand up, but he just stood up staggeringly, wiping the remaining liquid on his face and hair while taking deep breaths with his chest rising and falling. What exactly does this mean? Didn't we have enough fun in the first scene? In the second scene, we continue to be ordinary people. Hills shouted with some dissatisfaction. He certainly had good reason to be dissatisfied. Because he is a high-level listener, and high-level listeners have a great advantage among the listeners in this story world, but now, as the power continues to be sealed, this advantage has been erased again. If the first scene is just a warm-up game, you can play it however you want, seal everyone's power, or even create a character for everyone to enter the game like playing a game. It's no problem. You are the biggest broadcaster, but if this happens every time, forcing everyone to be on the same level, and destroying another kind of fairness for the sake of so-called fairness. So what's the point of improving strength? Everyone is constantly improving their strength, taking risks in the story world, and looking for opportunities in the real world. They are all like hungry wolves chasing even a little bit of strength improvement. Their eyes are red. As a result, you are playing in the story world. The world is unified and everyone is equal, so why should the audience work so hard? Isn't it enough to cherish your life in the story world and enjoy it comfortably in the real world? You will force equality anyway. Sudbai put his hands on the ground and slowly sat down on his knees. He had not yet asked about Hill's situation because he felt that Hills was not in the same situation as him, otherwise he would not have mistakenly thought that it was a broadcast that sealed him. If Hills, like himself, sensed that some strange force suddenly appeared in his body that suppressed his bloodline and other powers, he would not have stood up so stupidly and directly questioned the broadcast. The rest of the people also sat or stood up one after another. No one said anything because everyone was waiting. This is the second scene. Just like the old housekeeper came out in the first scene, the second scene should NPCs will also appear to guide everyone in playing this game, but because this time it is the real person, death should mean real death. In addition, Hill's question actually relieved everyone's pressure to a certain extent. Many times, we worry not about scarcity but about inequality. The senior audience members are now the same as myself and others. What else are you dissatisfied with? If everyone regains their original strength, it will be really uneasy for them. However, after waiting for about half an hour, when almost everyone had adapted from the sudden weakness caused by their physical strength being sealed, the NPC that was supposed to appear in the second scene had not yet appeared. Hill sat next to Subai at this time. His face was a little gloomy, but Subai, who knew him well, knew that this guy couldn't be so impetuous. No matter the dissatisfaction and anger shown on his face from the initial questioning to the present, more than anything, it was actually just a disguise. The NPC hasn't come out yet, Hill said. Subai nodded. Before he could figure out what the power of sealing himself and all the surrounding listeners was, Subai didn't have much thought to think about other things, especially before he woke up in the incubator. In this state, he heard the conversation between Su Yuhang and the young scientist. If nothing else, I should have revisited my old place, and this old place should be a place simulated and copied by the broadcast according to the environment that originally existed in the real world. Why did he and the brother he killed appear, and what was the reason why Su Yuhang and his wife brought him out? It seems that they got some answers in the conversation just now. I am Yao Yinzi. With the previous foreshadowing about his life experience, Subai would no longer be shocked and shocked. In addition, with the improvement of his strength, he had left Su Yuhang's soul deep in his memory in the last story world. Erased, that is to say, he is actually getting rid of the control of the couple step by step. And the so-called truth that I have learned now is nothing more than letting myself, a chess piece that was originally unaware, finally know the true purpose of being placed on this chessboard point. Compared with before, it is indeed an improvement. What's wrong with you? Hill seemed to have noticed something was wrong with Subai. Just as Subai knew him well, he also knew Subai well. The two men lived together in the same place and were in the same unit. So through long-term communication and getting along with each other in complete isolation from the outside world, we actually know each other's temperament thoroughly. It's okay, Subai didn't plan to tell Hills about this. At this moment, there was a crisp sound of click, 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 and a crack appeared on one side of the laboratory wall. The cracks began to spread slowly, and more trivial details were broken down. Slowly, the entire wall became completely broken flowers at this time. The layout of the entire Zhao family villa began to appear in Subai's mind. And Hills said, "That wall should be the wall I was stuffed into before. It is close to the red wall in the living room." Subai nodded. He also thought of this. In other words, there should be something in this wall. Then, the so-called punishment in the first scene should be paving the way for the beginning of the second scene, Subai analyzed. Yes, it's like a sacrifice. No matter how you play the first scene, a certain number of people will be punished in the end, either the murderer or the person who guessed the wrong murderer. The wall will definitely be punished. Stuffing fresh flesh and blood is preparation for the second scene, the sacrifice. Subai's eyes were fixed on the wall. In fact, the 9 audience members present were all paying attention to the wall that seemed to be falling off at any time, but only Subai knew who might come out of it. Papa, pop, pop. The wall did not fall off, but began to melt after a large piece was shattered. "It's liquid metal," Montari said. "It's liquid metal, and it has implanted intelligent memories. The technological level of this laboratory is much higher than the most cutting-edge laboratories in the real world." Montari returned to his original appearance, but his appearance didn't change much, so he could be distinguished clearly. "Is it the laboratory from 20 years ago? Are they even higher than the state-of-the-art laboratories 20 years from now? Is the guy who can claim to be a genius in front of Su Yuhang and still acquiesce to Su Yuhang, is he really that powerful?" Buzz. There was a muffled sound, like a door being opened. Inside the wall, there was a safe that was as tall as a person. At this moment, the door of the safe was opened, and a hand came out of the safe. Stretched out from inside, it was a hand without skin and flesh, completely made of bones, and then, a skeleton poked out of it. There is a pair of glasses on the skull's head, which makes his image look very strange. Gigi, Gigi, I'm starving to death, I'm thirsty to death. When the skeleton made a sound, one of Subai's hands clenched tightly. Although the sound was relatively hoarse, Subai was sure that it was the same as what he had heard before in his confused state. You heard what I just said, right? Uncle Zhao, I am a person who is very optimistic about you. And did the owner of this laboratory actually starve to death and die of thirst in the safe in the laboratory?